All right, I'm going to do a trade review from yesterday, Friday the 13th, 2012, July. I traded two stocks yesterday, LXK, GMCR. LXK was definitely my number one choice, discussed in the morning meeting. Right now we're looking at the weekly chart, and the reason it was my number one choice and I was excited about trading it was just when I looked at this weekly, and saw how weak it had been, and that it was gapping below this 25 here. It just seemed like a setup where the stock could get crushed. And 22.75 was kind of a first target, and then ultimately, if they really crushed it, $20. I think besides just looking at the technical pattern and thinking it could really get crushed, and it was gapping down a lot on the news. The thing that popped into my head was GMCR, and the last time something on the weekly really caught my attention was this GMCR, and this day back here it gapped from the 40s down to $30 a share, and I was able to catch that down to $25 intraday. And coincidentally, GMCR ended up being in play yesterday. It was kind of a strange coincidence, and so that's why LXK, I was completely focused on trading it short. And normally, when something has fresh news and gaps, I will put in the notes. And actually, let me show you how I do this. So right now we're looking at the back end of the SMB website. And this is what I do in the morning. So I go through scroll down through the programs and the tools, and stocks in play is what the morning meeting is called. And at the end of the morning meeting, I try to each day give my written notes out, and it's basically what we discussed during the meeting and in the video, and that's where people get most of their information. But I also do have some written notes of what we discussed in the meeting. And for LXK, I had a support level of 2050, which was, I guess, the pre-market low. Resistance 2450. Very negative reaction to earnings. Totally focused on short side, need volume to come in. So I almost never write something like that, totally focused on one side. Usually, I'll wait to see if it breaks one direction or the other, like JPM. I had below 3360, I would look at the short. Above 3480, I'd look at the long. So usually I'm going to be flexible depending on the price action. Even with a large gap down, you might try to fill. But this one, because of the weekly, because of the daily, it just was, just look at this downtrend. It's just unbelievable downtrend. If I had a little bit of a bounce, then the news comes out, so everybody who bought is, they're just completely screwed. And, as long as it's below 2470 or so, it's probably going to get crushed. So, why is this not showing? This is weird. So, okay, so now you can see actually, Alright, so now, for some reason in the long term you couldn't see what it did, but basically, okay, so here's the pre-market, and you can see the prior day before earnings, people were actually selling it in front of earnings. And of course, the conspiracy theorists out there will say they knew, and then of course, there's just as many charts where something gets sold in front of earnings and then it actually gaps up. But, okay, someone knew, they sold it off the day before, the market had actually rallied in the afternoon, and this one didn't rally. So some people were selling at the end of the day, and the news came out and it gapped lower. And so let's zoom in on the action. I'll talk about how I traded it. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was very tired. It was Friday. It had been a long week. I think if there hadn't been this good of a setup, I may have not even traded the open. But I was kind of salivating at a chance to short this. And one of the problems was the volume was very spotty in the pre-market. So my other note, besides being totally focused on the short side, what I wrote was need volume to come in, meaning it was down in an area. First of all, it was already down 4 points. So I was a little bit concerned that if it opened down here, how much more downside would I get? But someone did me a huge favor. When they opened it up, right when the market opened, they drove it up to $23 a share. which then gave us a lot of downside to work with to this 2050 level where it had printed a little bit in the pre-market. So it immediately opened up, and let me go to the tick chart, and I will discuss exactly how I traded it. And I thought I traded it okay. I actually could have traded it much better, but I think because I was tired, once I had a good position, I kind of just rode the trend. Basically, as it opened, it drove higher, and I was kind of in watch and wait and see mode, and looking, I knew 2250 kind of in my mind, 2 points from the support was where I was thinking that was the highest it could get. And it actually spiked through there the first time and came down, and then it spiked above it again. And there was some selling here at 2260, and I thought this might here, right here, would be the beginning of, you can actually see on the tick chart, it stops here, and they're selling, and it's 5 minutes after the open. But I was still being pretty cautious in terms of trading it on the short side, and I waited. And it spiked higher, got above 23, and then at this point I was just like, this is ridiculous, I need to start working into a short. But it still was moving higher, so I was cautious. I'd noticed on the way up they were selling at 2290, and so when it made this high here and came back down, when it came back up to the 2290 and wasn't making a new high, I started to try to get short, and actually was right in this area here, and I couldn't, was below 2290, and I couldn't get any prints off here in the 80s. I have finally got taken at 77 cents right in here for a little bit, spiked up again to 90, and then came back down, and then started to hold below 70 cents. I started to feel a little bit more comfortable, but I was patient and I waited, and then it finally got a little bit weaker. Okay, so you can see the better picture here. So you can see up right on the open, and it comes down, and you can see kind of concerted selling here at the 67, 68, and I started to watch that. Had a nice move down to 40, and it supported here a couple of times. So I watched this next up move, went back into the 60s again where I'd saw the selling prior, and then it quickly came back down to 40. And once it got below 40, that was it for me. That was enough for me to say, all right, I really need to start getting more aggressive with the shorting. I saw the selling at 90, I saw the selling at 68, it came back to that level, they were selling again, the area it supported had broken, and so I was looking for it to hold a little bit lower. Noticed some selling here in the high 20s, it did spike above it very briefly, but then it made a new low. The prior low here had been 9 cents, and then it came down to 22, and this is what I really liked here. So making a series of lows. Here's the high, lower low, lower low. I was hoping after it made, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower low, lower low. I was hoping that it would retrace from this 22 level somewhere into this area here where I could really start adding to my position. Again, still $1.70 away from the ultimate target, the 2050 area. Right here was perfect. It popped back up, 25 offer wouldn't lift. There was a buyer at 23 getting pounded and pounded and pounded, and I said, as soon as that buyer drops, that's where I'm going to hit and add to my position. I did, and had a stop above 25 cents for all those extra shares. Then it came down to close to 22 again. I said, all right, I needed to make a lower low. I need to see if there's a buyer somewhere. If I spot a buyer and they drop again, I'm going to hit some more. Great, perfect again. There was a 3-cent buyer. You can see just on the tick chart, they're buying, they're buying, they're buying. Dropped, hit some more. When I hit more there, what I basically did was I used, and now it's in a downtrend, and you're seeing retracements, retracements, retracements. As it got a point away from my original short from up here at 77 cents, and it came down quickly from the whole number, I actually took some covers, I think at 80 cents and then at 72 cents, and I was in a position of strength for when it popped back up to reload, and then basically sit back and see how low it was going to go. So it pops back up, got above 22. I ended up adding at 6 cents. I don't actually remember if it was, I guess it must have been into this area right here. Basically it popped up above 10 cents. It failed there, came back down below 10. I probably saw, I probably saw a buyer here, and as the buyer was starting to drop, I added back my position. I don't think I added below 22. And then let's see what happened. Okay, then it started to trend pretty cleanly, and if we go to like a 2-minute, we can see what happened here. So again, I was adding when the 23 buyer dropped here, stops above this line here above a quarter for all the extra shares. I added when the 3-cent buyer dropped here, covered into this down move, was ready to reshort into this retracement as long as it didn't get back above this 25 cents here, right? We're still in our downtrend. And then I was just waiting for the 72 to get taken out and act on how it behaved here. And this is an example, actually a review from one of my traders reminded me how I could have traded this better. But I was tired and I was a point in the money and I basically had another $1.20 downside and I was pretty relaxed and just kind of letting it trend down. But you could see once it took out this 72 cent here, this is trying to spike up, trying to spike up, trying to spike up. It couldn't hold above 70 cents. This was a spot where I could have definitely doubled up here, maybe even tripled up, and put a stop for all those extra shares above 80 cents. But I didn't do it, and once it made a new low here below 54, it continued to trend lower, and there's nothing really to do. And what I've been saying to the desk recently, and you zoom out, once you get past like 10:30, 10:15 even, you go to the 15-minute and you say, what does it look like? Do I have a trend? If I have a trend and the trade is working for you, there's nothing but to do but to really wait for something to change. You have to hold a position that's trending on the higher time frame if you're in a position of strength. So started a little bit up here shorting, shorted some more here, shorted some more below here. I was in a position of strength. There was nothing for me to do other than to wait to see what happened when it got down to my target and see if it stopped there or see if something changed. It didn't really change there, so I held some and it kept on going, and eventually I got stopped out when it changed. This is the 15-minute. It had a green bar here, and I think I got stopped out on the second green bar, and that was it for me, and I was done for the day. Again, I thought I traded it okay. Could have done better by adding into this nice consolidation here. I think anybody who added here, that's a great spot to add. Still plenty of distance to the target here, and overall was a really good stock to be involved in, and good stock. Second stock was GMCR. What did I say about GMCR? I don't remember. GMCR, resistance 2080, support 1980, weak pre-market, don't see any news, look at short near 2080, downside to 1950. I'd already been looking at it because of the LXK chart reminding me of it. So you can see I wanted to get a short off. So what I wanted was, here's why I wanted 2080, because it had been the support the prior day. So I was kind of hoping on the open that I could use this as my entry and then have a stop above 21. But unfortunately, that's not how it played out, so you got to adapt. It drove down on the open, was called out by one of the younger guys on the desk, called it out, weak, 1980, looked at it, it had already dropped 80 cents, so I waited for a retracement. It came back up to $20, I started shorting it very lightly, and looked for it to have some sort of trouble, which it did right here at around 18 cents. So I kind of loaded the boat right here, and I put a stop for half above 20 cents. I got stopped at a half. It immediately failed there after stopping probably a lot of people out who had their stops above 2020. But then I added everything I covered back when it started holding below 15 cents again into this down move. And then I just put my stop above, I think above a quarter, because this was the spike high here. And that was it. And it worked out fine. It definitely wasn't as good as LXK, but it didn't really have the type of fresh catalyst that LXK had. Look at the 15-minute. I don't remember. So I got this to below 20, and I think I covered some in, because 1950 had been my original support area. I think I covered some into this 1960. It just couldn't hold below here. I don't remember if it was the low 60s or mid 60s, but you can see at 60 cents it couldn't hold below. So I covered here, and that was it for me. I put my stop above 65 cents, I think. And I got stopped out at the end of the day. Actually, when it got down here all the way to 1920s, I think I I actually did a half stop. I did a stop in the 50s here for half, and then the other half got stopped out here. So overall, made some money in it. Lost a little bit in this stop out here. And those were the two stocks. And I got to tell you, on the open, when the market was strong, and we broke above 134.50 with ease, which was our first trigger point for the market to maybe be a little bit more bullish, and it was above 135, and my two positions were shorts, I was kind of like, not the greatest, but they seem to have catalysts, and even on days when the market's strong, there are stocks that are weak, and those two happen to be weak. Would have been smart of me to actually get involved in this PG, which was called out early on the desk when it took out the prior high, but I have a strong bias against the stock because it never really moves much. But it had moved big time. It had moved big time the prior day, probably its biggest move in years, from 61.5 to 64, so I should have been buying it above the prior day's high, and it was great. It actually went up another $1.50, which is a ridiculous move for PG. So those are the trades I made yesterday, and that's it. Hope everyone's having a good weekend.